In this video, I'm going to talk about the Keynesian aggregate supply or the Keynesian AD slash AS model. Now, you need to understand that new classical slash monetarist economists and Keynesian economists agree on the shape of aggregate demand. So the source of the disagreement is not about aggregate demand. Everything about aggregate demand is the same. The source of the disagreement is about the shape of the aggregate supply curve. So this is what the Keynesian aggregate supply curve looks like. Okay, as you can see, it is only one curve, but it has three sections. There's section 1 or section I, section double I, and section triple I. So it's one curve with three sections, unlike the new classical slash monetarist model where there are two curves. There's a short run aggregate supply curve, which is upward sloping, and a long run aggregate supply curve, which is vertical. In the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, there's only one curve with three sections. Make sure you label it either Keynesian AS or just AS. Don't put LRAS on a Keynesian curve because there is no long run in Keynesian analysis. Make sense? There is no long run. It's just one curve with three sections. Now, there's only one equilibrium in Keynesian analysis. It is the intersection of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Unlike the new classical model or the monetarist model, where there are two equilibriums. There's a short run equilibrium, which is the intersection of aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply and aggregate demand. And then there's the long run equilibrium. In Keynesian analysis, there's only one equilibrium. It is the intersection of AD and AS. Regardless of wherever it is on the curve, it's only one equilibrium. There is no short run equilibrium and long run equilibrium. There's just macroeconomic equilibrium. All right, so let's talk about each section. So the horizontal section, section 1 right here, if the economy is operating on the horizontal section, section 1, that means there is lots of spare capacity, a lot of unemployed resources. There's high unemployment in the economy. Okay? So if AD increases along the horizontal section, Y, which is real GDP, can increase, but APL remains unchanged. So I want you to imagine an AD curve here shifting to the right to here. You can see that any shift in AD along the horizontal section will lead to an increase in real GDP, Y, but will not lead to an increase in average price level. There will be no inflation. Real GDP or output can increase without creating inflation. All right. Section 2 is the upward sloping section. It is upward sloping from YP, the potential output. So basically, when the economy reaches its potential, aggregate supply starts to slope upward until it becomes vertical. All right. So in section 2, which is the upward sloping section, there is some spare capacity. Okay, so the economy is approaching full employment, but not quite there yet. Okay, if AD increases along this section, Y will increase, real GDP will increase, and so will the average price level. So imagine if there's an AD curve here along section 2, and it shifts to the right to here, you'll see that both real GDP, Y, and average price level, APL, will increase. Section 3 is vertical. It is vertical at what Keynesian analysis calls Y max. This is like the maximum real GDP that the economy can produce with the quantity and quality of resources and technology available. Okay? So section 3 is completely vertical, which means the economy has reached full capacity, full employment. Okay, there are no unemployed resources. This is like the economy operating on its PPC, on the actual PPC. Okay, full capacity, full employment. If AD increases along the vertical section, Y will remain unchanged. Real GDP does not change because the economy cannot produce any more output. It has reached maximum capacity, and only the average price level will rise. Okay, along the vertical section. All right. Now, Some textbooks do not make this distinction between YP and Y max. Like, for example, many textbooks will just call Y max YFE or YP. And that's okay. It doesn't really matter. You can actually just make the vertical section here the full employment level of output, the potential output. And some textbooks will make a distinction. They'll say that the potential output is basically the maximum level of output the economy can produce without there being any inflation. And then there's a range of output between potential output and like maximum or full employment output. You don't need to stress too much about this distinction. Okay? Now let's move on to inflationary gaps, recessionary gaps, and full employment equilibrium. Okay, so this slide is going to be a little bit repetitive because I'm going to be talking about the same things I've just spoken about, but again, it's a very good review. So how do you represent a recessionary gap on the Keynesian model? Okay, basically, AD intersects AS on the horizontal section. So if the aggregate demand intersects aggregate supply on section 1 or section I, the economy has a recessionary gap. Okay, the recessionary gap is basically YP minus YE. Okay, it's a gap in real GDP. Okay, whatever the economy's potential output is minus the actual output, which is YE, that's the size of the recessionary gap. When there's a recessionary gap, there is high unemployment. AD can increase without causing inflation. So imagine if the government injects money into the economy, government expenditure using expansionary fiscal policy, that can shift aggregate demand to the right, which causes Y to increase without there being a rise in the average price level. All right, what about an inflationary gap? Okay, an inflationary gap happens when aggregate demand intersects aggregate supply on the upward sloping or the vertical section. So any intersection of aggregate demand with either section 2 of the Keynesian AS curve or section 3, that will create an inflationary gap equal to YE, equilibrium real GDP, which is the intersection of AD and AS, minus YP. Okay? When there is an inflationary gap, there is low unemployment. The economy is either approaching or has reached full employment. Okay? Any increase in AD will also or only increase average price level. So for example, if AD increases along the upward sloping section, there will be some increase in real GDP, some increase in output, but also there will be an increase in the average price level. But if it increases along the vertical section, there will be no increase in output because the economy has reached its maximum output. There will only be an increase in average price level. There will only be inflation. So remember, when there's a recessionary gap, AD intersects AS on the horizontal section, AD can increase without really causing inflation because there's plenty of spare capacity in the economy. But along the upward sloping or the vertical section, an increase in AD will either only increase the average price level or cause a very small increase in Y as well as an increase in the average price level, depending on are we on the upward sloping section or the vertical section. All right. Now, full employment equilibrium in the Keynesian model happens when the potential output, YP, is equal to the equilibrium output. So basically, AD intersects Keynesian AS sort of like halfway on the upward sloping section. So if you take the upward sloping section and you just kind of reach like the midpoint of the upward sloping section, that is where there is, stability, macroeconomic equilibrium, macroeconomic stability, full employment equilibrium, YP is equal to YE. All right, let's move on to long-term growth in the Keynesian model. So again, here, there's going to be some repetition from the previous video that I posted where I showed you long-term growth using the new classical or the monetarist long-run aggregate supply curve. Here, it's the same kind of idea. Okay, so long-term growth it occurs when there's an increase in either the quantity and/or quality of the factors of production. Okay, so if there's a discovery of new natural resources, major technological advancements, long-term improvements in human capital, the education, skills, and health of the workers, immigration, migrants migrating into the country that will increase the size of the labor force, natural population growth, institutional improvements that make the economy more efficient, less bureaucratic, less red tape. Okay, all of these things, as well as supply side policies. Okay, supply side policies are policies that are used by the government to increase the economy's productive capacity and potential output. The effect is that they shift the long run aggregate supply curve, or the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, to the right. Okay, so you can see any of those changes, which are basically changes in the quantity and slash or quality of the FOPs, will shift Keynesian aggregate supply curve to the right. It increases from AS1 to AS2. So what you're really doing is just kind of like extending that horizontal area and then just drawing another upward sloping and vertical area that is kind of parallel to it. And then you can see the economy's potential output has increased from YP1 to YP2. Okay, so again, let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. I am kind of adding as I go along worksheets to help you practice these concepts. You'll find them in the video description below. Please leave comments if you have any questions on the video. Like, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a member of the channel where you get access to a lot of exclusive content to help you prepare for your IB exam. It's always a pleasure creating those videos for you guys, and thank you very much for your patience with me. All right? Have a good one. Bye.